Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Johnny Welsh. Johnny has worked as a professional bartender in Frisco, Colorado for over 20 years. He has a degree in Italian language, literature, and culture from Syracuse University, and he will tell you that his 5 years of university study, while it did earn him a degree, has been a fantastic prerequisite for a lifelong career in the mixology arts. Johnny can now dictate funny bar stories in 2 different languages, and his latest hobby is twisting these topics into books. He is the author of Paper Maps, No Apps, an unplugged travel adventure, and his first book was Weedgalized in Colorado, about the legalization of marijuana in Colorado, and he has won 2 awards from the Reader's Favorite. Johnny, so fantastic to bring you on to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Howard. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I first of all want to say 2 things. One is the fact that you're a bartender. I've always wanted to be a bartender. I have never checked that off my bucket list. And I read a little bit about your backstory, specifically hanging out in Europe a little bit, learning about wine and vineyards. So I think the best place to start is somewhere at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's let our listeners understand a little bit about your journey and going from Syracuse all the way up to being an award-winning author.
Thank you so much. Well, it's funny you mentioned that the Italy trip. I remember when I graduated from Syracuse, I had applied to be a doctor of chiropractic at Seneca Falls School in upstate New York. And that same week, I also applied to go and help with an internship in the hills of Tuscany, right near Siena, and help build up an internship where people would study the language, culinary arts, organic farming, sustainable living. It was in the infancy stages back then, but my degree helped fit the protocol. So I applied to both of those. And I remember that summer after I graduated, I received a letter of acceptance to be a doctor of chiropractic at Seneca Falls. And then a few days later, another letter, I was accepted to go to Italy and help with the internship at this castle called Spinocchia. I tell you, I was 23 years old and I was pretty scared. I didn't know what to do. I'm 23. I'm like, man, do I give up being a doctor to go and run in the wind in Italy? And I did. I chose the life of travel, and that actually pushed me into the bartending, which I had done at Syracuse as well. And it's about 27, 28 years later, I'm still bartending. I love what I do. It gives me plenty of time off, and the stories and the content that I see and observe from behind the bar, they are infinite. So it's a good source of my material.
Fantastic. Well, again, I have to add another source of envy here. I've always wanted to go to Italy. I was holding out till I was married. I'm still single. But the fact that just being able to hang out there and work amongst the people in the vineyards, some people just dream about that, and it's on their when I retire bucket list. And here you did it when you were in your young 20s.
Yeah, I do. I highly recommend getting out there and checking that place out, or any place, overseas. I really believe that international travel changes perspective permanently. And I did learn a lot. And when I arrived at that castle, that is when I started to write. Something there turned on my inspiration. I still don't know what it is. I always joke and say it was the red wine because it was so organic, and it helped with the ideas. But something there really inspired me to write. And I began to write short stories, song lyrics, music, nonfiction, poetry. I did a little bit of everything. And I saved all those notebooks.
So you have those notebooks in a locker somewhere, I would imagine, if close by.
They are in a fireproof box in the house, yes. And I do plan on getting into those eventually and extracting some of those stories and then using today's perspective, what I've learned since then, to kind of maybe mold some really cool ideas and cool stories about that.
Okay. So when you came back from Italy, how did you, I hate to say fall in, but there had to be something that said, let me bartend for a little while and see what happens and let me find my way? Or how did that journey start?
I remember I returned from Italy. I was living on the East Coast in southern New Jersey, right near Atlantic City. And my brother was in Colorado and he needed help building houses and he had a place for me to live. He had a job lined up and I had nothing else going on after that time slotted internship that I had helped create in Italy. So, my girlfriend at the time, we just packed our car and kept on driving until we saw mountains. And working with him, I was able to find part-time work as a bartender, which I love to do. So I worked with my brother. I did some part-time bartending, which turned into a full-time and a full life career.
What is it about bartending that attracted you? Because I've worked in restaurants before. One in particular had a really nice bar. And the bartender, I will tell you, had the most fun of anybody in the restaurant.
Yeah.
What attracted you to the bartending as a full-time gig?
Well, Howard, my passion, aside from writing books now, is travel. And bartending really facilitated that because you could always get some shifts covered and take off for a 4-day weekend or work a whole season and then take off a week or two at the end of the season when it really slows down. A lot of the restaurants where I live in Frisco, Colorado, they're all geared around the resorts and the ski industry in the wintertime. They used to close for 5 to 6 weeks in the off season. So we had about 5 to 6 weeks off in the spring, then again in the fall. And if you played your cards right and you saved up your money and you planned properly, you could actually do some really cool travel. That's what attracted me to be a bartender up here in Colorado. And then as I'm bartending now, I get to meet people who come and visit. And they're travelers as well. So even though I'm not traveling, I'm bartending, I'm hearing stories from people they're traveling the world and traveling the country, and they're bringing those stories to me now. We can trade and exchange stories. It's quite a fun dynamic.
No doubt. And I would imagine there's probably a handful of those travelers that are surprised, no less, when you start returning back lines of Italian to them.
Yeah, they are surprised, especially if they are from Italy or they're familiar with the language.
Very cool. Very cool. So when you're traveling, and I love the fact that there's 2 parts of the year, the spring and in the fall where you can kind of take off and do some of the travel. And what's also wonderful about that too is in this day and age, if you were to talk to millennials, they would tell you or you would hear that the experiences we have are much more important than the trinkets we have. In my generation, which is the tail end of the baby boomers, a lot of it was the house, the car, the Rolex watch, et cetera. Not that I ever had a Rolex watch or ever will, but the idea of the experiences of traveling throughout the U.S. and globally is fantastic. As you were starting doing the writing, the travel, the bartending, how did you end up getting into the studying and researching for the first book on the weed industry or marijuana industry in Colorado?
Well, that all started from the guests and the tourists and the out-of-state visitors. They would come into the restaurant. It's a fine dining restaurant where I work. There's lots of time to talk. And they would always ask me questions about the new industry. Like, what's it like to live in the first state that went legal? They wanted to hear the underground stories. They wanted to hear from the bartender or the barber or the local realtor. They didn't want to hear from the media. I kept getting questions all the time. And it wasn't what I expected. The folks coming in were not the ones I thought that I was going to see. They were older couples. A lot of them older couples, well-to-do, well-spoken, and very polite. And they would let me know casually, hey, we're marijuana tourists. We want to see what this is all about. We want to know, where's the dispensary? And it's kind of funny because they'll look both ways or over their shoulder when they ask me. I'm like, because we're pigeonholed into that law that it's been there forever. I would tell them where it was. And that's how I figured this is an unprecedented time in our nation that we are legalizing marijuana. And I don't partake in it like I used to. It's really strong now. I like my wine and my beer, but I have enough experience in it to write about it. And I put my writings aside that I was working on to push out this first book to be written in the first state, which was Colorado, to go legal. Now,
you won an award from as a reader's favorite. Tell us more about that.
I was so overwhelmed when that happened. I never expected that to happen. A lot of the conversational tone in the book, it was all about a lot of anecdotes and research and interviews. And I set my book in for one of those competitions, and it won international competition for humor and nonfiction because I did the research. I told the story And I also introduced the whole topic with, a lighthearted, humorous way to kind of break the ice and really get the conversation open.
And what was the reaction from your family and friends when you published the book? I mean, did they know you were writing it? Did you spring it on them? What was their reaction?
No, my friends, they did know about it because I kept asking for advice and having big mastermind meetings on which questions I should ask. How far should I tap into the industry? Which companies are popping up? The friends were behind me 100%. My mom was she was pretty upset that my first book had to be about marijuana. So that was one of the hardest things that I had to deal with the writing of it, because she's like, really? Your first book's about marijuana? And I had to laugh because she held off for a while. She's, very apprehensive of the topic. But then she read the book and she understood what I was trying to do, which was just to capture that whole time capsule, the first few years of legalization.
What did you learn about the process of writing this book? Now, you've got your trunks filled with notebooks and your writings from your early days back in Italy and continuing on. But what did you learn about yourself in this process of becoming a published author?
I learned that it's a lot longer process than I ever would have imagined. I thought that I would write down the whole book, the whole stories. The editor would just polish up some grammar and we'd publish it. That was not the case. There was a lot to do with the structural edit that I had no idea, which was actually good. And I really lucked out and found one of the best editors I possibly ever could have found, in a gal named Jody Ryan. And she would actually restructure some of the stories and the paragraphs and chapters so that my book had a nicer flow, where it started with the history, then the questions, and then the humor came in, then the anecdotes, then some more research. She really helped with the structure of that book. So I learned that editing can take longer than writing the actual book.
No doubt about that. And besides your friends, perhaps family, had you joined any writing groups or mastermind groups where you're sharing stories and kind of challenging each other to keep accountable?
I was with Toastmasters for a little while, where we actually had to write down and then you tell the story verbally. I did get with some writing groups, but I felt it better for myself to actually just focus my time. I would actually handwrite in a notebook a lot of the content, and then take those notes and then type them in the computer, which was a good practice for me because I get to look at the story. I can hear it as I'm reading it, to myself, and then rewriting it. That was a good first rewrite for me. And I found that the more I read and rewrote my own content, the better it got. And it was more well-rounded topic at that point.
Do you think the experience of having written this first book and going through the initial paces, I mean, I equated writing my first book, and I've only written one, and half of another. It was like birthing a baby. It was painful.
Yes, it was very long and arduous, and I did not anticipate editing more months than I did when I wrote the first version of the manuscript. But it was fun. I'm hooked. I love it.
Fantastic. And how did that experience start to inform your new book, Paper Maps, No Apps, an Unplugged Travel Adventure?
Well, like I said, the first book was a bar topic that came up quite often. And I like to see these bar topics that happen in the restaurant's atmosphere. People have a glass of wine or a drink with their dinner, and they open up just a little more than it normally would have, which adds to a wider perspective on some of the topics. And you can embellish. And then there's the tangents, and we're laughing, and there's humor. And I love that. So I noticed these things happening in this little microcosm of my bar/restaurant. The next thing I did notice, which was a disconnect between the people that are traveling, which I've loved for so many years. And they're not interacting as much as they were in the past. And I noticed they are on their phones. They're hooked, they're mesmerized.
Oh, yeah.
And and I was like, man, I'm observing this. And, I just I'm not a soapbox bartender. I'm not going to say you shouldn't do this or do that. No, I just lead by example. But I had this idea with my girlfriend and I to take our next road trip, and we had a dare. And the dare was to see who could unplug from their smartphones the longest. And in the end, we both unplugged, and we made rules before the trip started. So our goal was to be 95% unplugged and then tell what happened to us each and every day because we were more alert and more present.
What were some of those rules?
Well, 95% unplugged. If you plug it into my little equation that I created,
okay.
If you sleep 8 hours, that means you actually have 48 minutes of time that you are allowed to go ahead and get on your phone and use it if you need to. And we really didn't need to. I had to do some business emails at 10 a.m. every morning because I was getting interviews for the first book on radio shows. I paid a PR company, so I had to answer some emails.
Right.
We were allowed to text our moms every couple of days. You can't leave mom out of the equation, trust me. So I'll send out a search party looking for me. And it was Mother's Day, so we called. So we allowed ourselves a little bit of leeway, a little license if we actually did need it. For example, we got lost going to a little town on the coast of Mexico as we drove in. And it's a great place. Mexico is a fun country, beautiful people, beautiful food. But I was warned, don't go near Tijuana with a brand new car full of your valuables. And
don't get lost in Mexico.
Yeah, in Tijuana. So here we go. I see, oh boy, I'm seeing signs for Tijuana. I'm like, you know what? It's turning towards nighttime now. I'm like, oh boy. So Chrissy turned on our GPS for about 15, 20 minutes, which was well within our 95% rule.
Wow.
Actually, we hit 99% unplugged on our trip.
So you have these rules about being unplugged. And this included checking sports, the social sites, calling into the mom bit. Of course, you have to do that. But by the way, what does your mom say now that you've come out with the second book?
Oh, she loves it. She's a proud mom. She has copies of my book with her everywhere she goes now. It's pretty funny.
I can imagine she's got her handbag and she's got copies of the books. Oh, my son, the author.
Yeah, she sure does. It's pretty funny.
That's probably why you're a best-selling author. She's the one that's marketing your books for you.
She's helping a lot.
Tell us about this trip now. I mean, how did you, I would imagine, well, let me ask you this. Are you the type of person with your girlfriend, now your fiance, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That you're just going to get into the car and drive? Do you have to have a plan? No, here's how much we're going to drive. Here's where we're going to stay. Or do you okay, let the chips fall where they may?
A little bit of both. I can go either way, but sometimes if we go on a longer trip, we will book a couple places before we leave just to add a little structure to the trip. But then, the whims of the road can just dictate where we go from there. And it's so much more fun let's keep on driving. We can go ahead and we'll find something. We'll meet some people. We'll ask for directions. And that happened a lot.
What were some of the, stories that, there had to have been so many of them, but is there one or two stories that jump out at you, or, some of the people that you meet, the characters on the road that you meet that jump out at you is like, oh, I'll never forget this as long as I live?
Absolutely. We kind of named our road trip Paper Maps, No Apps. It was kind of a fun joke between us for the first 4 or 5 days of the trip. And we were journaling each day, and it wasn't really an idea for a book just then. We just decided to unplug and just digital detox. When that digital leash came off, we felt so free. There's no one that can take us off our course. No one's going to call us or text us and tell us we can't do this or do that. We were free. We allowed ourselves to use the car radio and then the little clock radios in the hotel rooms. It was hilarious. So on about the 5th or 6th day of the trip, we're having lunch at a place in Las Vegas. We're staying in Las Vegas called Guy Fieri's.
Oh, yeah.
And because we're not hunched over on our phones or we're not looking down, we're looking up. And our shoulders are back, our chins are up. We feel free. The bartender and servers are noticing that about us. They're like, what's up with you two? You guys seem kind of chipper and pretty alert. I swear, what's your deal? So they go, well, we kind of had this little dare between the two of us to unplug for 16 days on our road trip. She's like, wait a minute. She walks over, puts her elbows in a bar. She said, you're doing what? I go, well, we have no smartphones. They're turned off. She said, well, how are you guys getting around? And so we got paper maps. And she was like, no. And she says, what do you guys do in the morning? Like, well, we talk to each other. And she's like, no. I'm embellishing her reaction, but she did have a reaction. And her name was Laura. And she finished her shift about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Never forget this. And, watching her walk away after she was talking to us all shift. And she comes back over into the restaurant puts her coat back on. She's like, I just want to thank you guys today because you changed my perspective. Because when Laura was asking us what we were doing, we were telling her the other servers were gathering around too. It was like a treasure hunt. Wait a minute, what are they doing? What's going on? And because of that commotion was happening, there was guests at the bar that stood up and walked behind us. I remember there was a guy named Bello and a guy named Michael from Hawaii. What are you guys doing? What's this crazy trip you're talking about? Everyone wanted to know what we were doing. So then, right then, when Laura told us that we changed her perspective, that's when the idea and the joke of a name of the road trip became an idea for a book.
It's really interesting. The littlest idea, for sake of a better word, can have such a big impact on everybody else around you. Here it's like kind of an inside joke and amongst yourselves, or a challenge amongst yourselves, but then all of a sudden it's taken on a bigger story, a bigger impact.
Yeah. And then after that evening, Chris and I, we're talking nonstop to each other. We're creating an outline. We have to document this trip. We have to share this story because we had no idea that it would actually affect anybody. It was more of a social experiment, so to speak. And at that point, it turned into the idea for a book. We had to write down everything, and we rewrote the past 4 or 5 days to the best of our ability because it was fresh on our heads. And then from then on, we searched for new things that were happening to us. Like for example, just the basic, we noticed more art in a restaurant because our heads were up. I'm looking in the corner. That's a funny place to put a painting. But the fact that someone put a painting in the corner, that's pretty cool. And then I noticed it. I never would have seen that if I was glued to my smartphone.
It's interesting about the phones and you walk down the street. I'm on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And if you're not careful and you're on your smartphone, you're going to walk into the street.
Yeah.
and what are all the significant events that will not occur because I had my head down in the smartphone? 2 people who will not cross paths because they had their head down. And I think your book is inspiring because you're challenging people to put the phone away, unplug, and be present in the moment. And there's something very powerful for that. So as you started to gather this idea of crafting this book, how did you then set out to kind of put the pieces together?
Well, I actually went on and did some research on the whole smartphone thing that's happening to us. And like you're saying, you'll walk into the street, if you're not paying attention, I did some research and I put some facts in the book. Like, for example, I think it was Germany. Yeah, Germany was experimenting with sidewalks that light up so that you don't go into the street if you're looking down and texting. And I know that China was experimenting with a texting lane for pedestrians.
Oy.
So, yeah. So the more I learned about this, the more it brought to my attention, and we never tell anybody to not use their phones, or I don't preach abstinence. I'm a bartender. That's bad for business for me.
Very bad for your business.
But all we're really saying is, watch what our example is and just reduce a little bit. And because we did reduce that little bit, we're engaged to be married now because we listen to each other just a tiny bit more. And it was easy to put the book together because each day was a chapter, and the people we met became characters. And the observations that we started to see more became clearer to us throughout the trip. One of the other things I remember was the dinner we had at a restaurant. And it was a candlelit dinner. It was an Italian restaurant. And because we were looking around again, Christy was asking me to translate some of the Italian phrases that were written on the walls and around the restaurant. And that was really cool. I'm like, you know what? We have a candlelight on our table, first of all, not a blue digital light. She's asking me this. We just had time stood still. It felt like time was going so slow during that dinner. It was awesome. And I loved it. And another time we were in a bungalow on the beach in Mexico during a rainstorm. It was kind of chilly to go for a hike at nighttime. So we sat inside the bungalow, made a little fire in the chimney. And since we don't have our technology with us, we're looking around the bungalow for things to do. And we found these cool little tops and games and things to spin and play and have fun. Of course, we're drinking some wine at this point, and we're having some more fun with the wine. And I think the owners left us a bottle of tequila. That went away too. But I had a book with me that I bought in Vegas from David Sedaris, one of my favorite authors. I saw him speaking.
Okay.
So I tell Christy, how about this? How about you sit next to the fire, and I'll read to you from our new book we just got. She said, that's a great idea. So I have never read to somebody from a book like that. And we kept on going. I went through 2-3 chapters of just pure reading to her. That's how we spent our night.
Johnny,
we passed our,
I have to tell you, that's incredibly romantic. I don't know if you knew that.
It was, but to me, it was more of a magical moment. Not that I never knew that it could be fun. I just never really thought about it. When you give yourself extra time to think, and the extra time is available to us all if you just look up and look away for a second.
Speaking of stories, is there a passage in the book that resonates for you that you'd be willing to give to our audience?
Yes. So towards the end of the trip, I had a couple little ideas and revelations. So I can read this real quick for you guys.
Great. Thank you.
It says, taking this trip and recording our experiences helped me become aware of how much I rely on modern technology. More importantly, it allowed me to revisit a time that wasn't as fast-paced and remember childhood joys like road trips and hula hoops and tasty cakes. It's made both Christy and me try to use technology less in all aspects of our lives, beyond just our smartphones. We try to take the stairs instead of elevators, walk or ride our bikes to destinations within a few blocks instead of driving, pick up a newspaper or old book and sit and read every once in a while. And sometimes even bring that book along to help pass the time while waiting the line in the post office or DMV, for example. It's okay to be idle. It's okay to not do anything. That's a little side that I added, because what I also learned in my studies is there's a thing happening now. It's called isolation deprivation. That author, Cal Newport, he's a Georgetown professor, wrote in his book. It's when you never let your mind be idle. You never let your mind sit and be still. And I'm guilty too. I'll go on my phone to check an email, and then a half hour goes by. I'm like, oh my God. I go, I am nowhere near that email right now. And it's funny. I like it. It's entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
But I also have goals that I want to accomplish in my everyday, day-to-day life. And isolation deprivation means that your mind just never has a time to switch off or turn off or be blank.
Well, I think we need to be able to unplug and because there's all this constant rewiring going on in our brain through new experiences and stimulations. And sometimes it's nice just to sit back and just the quiet. I love the quiet of the morning with a cup of coffee. Thank God coffee's not digital, or else I'd be in trouble.
I'll be in trouble.
I'm really curious, now that you've experienced going without this technology, if you were to look back to the experience being in Italy, working up in this village, this town, working in the winery, was there some similarities to the pleasures they experienced in comparison to the pleasures you and your fiance experienced through the act of being unplugged? Can you make a connection there?
I can make a connection. I remember clearly now in Italy, they focus, when they have a meal together, they focus on each other. They focus on conversation. They focus on the quality of the food and the enjoyment of the food and the homemade process of the food, the home-cooked meals. They can just taste that love in that food. Now, I'm not trying to sound corny or cheesy, but it's true. And they just sit and pass the time with each other. And I remember that vividly when I was in Italy. It still exists today. And that I had a lot of those feelings pop up again when Christy and I were just sitting there. And there's a lot of times when you can just occupy your time by looking at your phone or whatever. But now we're forced to not think of a new way, but for me, it's an old way. Christy's younger than me. I don't know. It's only been 10 years since we've had this technology in the palm of our hands, but it feels like it's been forever. And I love that slow way of life. There's even a slow food movement going through Europe right now, and I believe it's coming to America as well.
Well, let's hope it gets here pretty darn quickly.
Yeah.
Listen, Johnny, before we head out, is there some final insights that you have, a lesson, perhaps another book, a phrase that has been an inspiration for you and that you'd like to share? Maybe it's something Christy would like to share. You could share on her behalf with our audience.
Actually, you actually brought it to my attention about 10 minutes ago when you mentioned people are missing out on who they might meet, who they might see if their focus is on the smartphone. And Christy and I have said this to people all along. It's almost like bringing back serendipity. And I'd love to say it's bring back serendipity and chance encounters. To me, I don't know. That's the reason why I would travel, is to meet the new people and to have those magic experiences that you wouldn't normally have by staying in your hometown.
Very good. Very good. Johnny, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
My website has everything on there. It's www.johnnywelsh.com. That's JOHNNYWELSH.com. I have some funny videos, some awesome photos on there from our trips as well. And I have a little thing I'm working on now. It's called Johnny Bartender's Twisted Topics, which, like I said, the first topic was the weed. The next topic was the observation of smartphones. So now I have all these new mini books coming out. It'll be very short mini books about twisted topics that we observe. I add a little splash of humor and a splash of wine, and we have a book come out.
Fantastic. Well, we definitely look forward to that. And we will provide the backlinks to your website as well as to the Amazon page and also to the Reader's Favorite page where they've acknowledged both of those books. And again, congratulations for 2 wonderful books. And this podcast was kind of a spur of the moment. So I haven't had a chance to get the book, but it's near and dear to my heart. I mean, just being able to put your phone down and be in the moment. So I'm really looking forward to reading it and just kind of hearing your travel stories, because I love travel as well. So thank you for that. And listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and we look forward to learning more about you and your work and your future writing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we have just been chatting with Johnny Welsh. He is a professional bartender in Frisco, Colorado. And a long time ago, he made this decision, chiropractic or travel, wine, experiences. And he kind of chose the latter of the two. And I think it was a good decision. And plus the fact his mom is incredibly proud of him, and she's out there selling books for him. So we thank Johnny's mom as well. Listen, we're going to provide links back to both books, Weedgalized in Colorado, about the legalization of marijuana in the state of Colorado. And we'll also provide links back to Paper Maps, No Apps, and Unplugged Travel Adventure, and also to Johnny's website, johnnywelsh.com. So, folks, this is another enjoyable podcast. Please let us know what you think. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment. If you have some questions, leave a comment, either for the Success Insight podcast team or for Johnny. But let us know, share it. You can find our podcast on our main website page, successinsightpodcast.com. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as Pinterest, and on YouTube. So wherever your platform of choice is, I hope you enjoy this podcast. And there most certainly are going to be more like it this year. So just keep tuning in and get notified. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.